call Grant Robertson.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. It's a pleasure to take a call on Part 2 of the Arts Council of New Zealand Toi Aotearoa Bill. I know I'm not allowed to refer to the absence of members, but the participation of the Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage in this particular part of the debate would be useful, not only because we obviously all enjoy his company in the House, but also because I have a number of questions around Part 2 that I think the Minister might be able to shed some light on. Part 2 deals largely with community arts providers, and I want at the outset of my contribution to make clear that the Labour Party is a strong supporter of community arts councils. We believe that at their grassroots level, community arts councils play a critical role in providing opportunities for local communities to participate in the arts, to provide support and funding for that, and to ensure there's coordination of arts activities at a local level. And right throughout the history of New Zealand's artistic and creative endeavours, community arts councils have played an important role. So we strongly support them. But the language that's contained in Part 2 of this bill is at times confusing, vague and weak. And I actually agree with Tracy Martin about the fact that if in Clause 18 we're going to have administration of community arts councils by local authorities, let's just say it. Let's just say that is what we are going to do. Because at the moment we have this sort of odd permissive phrasing in 18.1, the Arts Council may appoint a local authority to have administrative responsibility for a community arts council. But it might not as well. And what happens in the situations where it doesn't? And in fact, the whole section is full of a negative language about what will happen when funds are allocated and how funds can be taken away from community arts councils. But it doesn't go into much detail about what community arts councils are there for, what they should be doing, and how they can be supported. So I think there's a lack of directness in Part 2, and it raises a series of questions which I intend to work through in a couple of calls, Mr Chair. So the first of those is we come to the beginning of this, which is Section 14, that the Arts Council may designate community arts providers, and it lists off in that the Arts Council can create these, that this body can represent in relation to the arts either a specific geographical area or a defined community of interest. Now, one question I would be asking the Minister and the Chair to take a call on, or indeed the Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage if he's listening to us, is one of the submitters to the bill was the Taieri Community Arts Council from Dunedin. And they made a very brief submission to the committee, but it was quite pointed. And I'll just read the beginning of it, Mr Chair. The Taieri Community Arts Council is in the process of winding up its business and ceasing to exist. Now, bear in mind that the government sat on its tush on this bill for so long that that was in 2010. So we can make a fairly sound assumption that the Taieri Community Arts Council did wind up their business. And they said, this is because Creative New Zealand have decreed that no community arts council may ring-fence funding for an area within a local authority. Now, my understanding of this, of course, is that the Taieri Community Arts Council sits within the Dunedin City Council boundaries, and the Dunedin City Council presumably was saying, or between Creative New Zealand and the Dunedin City Council, they were saying we cannot agree to funding an area like the Taieri Community Arts Council within that local authority. My question for the government is, does this change in Part 2 allow an organisation like the Taieri Community Arts Council to operate in the way that they wanted to before they wound themselves up? Because what they were saying was, we have a defined area of interest. The Taieri Plains area around the township of Mosgiel, for those who come in from Dunedin Airport, the Taieri Community Arts Council was providing opportunities in that area which they did not feel were being provided by the local authority, and they wanted to be supported for doing that. Like a lot of community arts providers, they also then went on to say that they felt that Creative New Zealand over the years had let community arts dissipate, and that there was too much participation, too much concentration, in their words, on high art. And we know that the Minister, Chris Finlayson, is a great fan of high art, and that's all very well, but community arts councils do operate at the core of arts provision in New Zealand. So that is a question for the government. would an organisation like the Taieri Community Arts Council, Mr Chair, would an organisation like the Taieri Community Arts Council have the ability to be able to operate and ring-fence funding for an area within a local authority? And that is a question that we would like answered. Mr Chair, I then want to go on to clause 16 of the bill, which talks about the establishment of community arts councils in relation to geographic areas. And this is where Tracy Martin is absolutely right, that if you... I know, there's a first time for everything. No. This is where Tracy Martin is correct, that community arts councils are here being established under clause 16 for regional specific geographical areas. But then if we flick over to clause 18, suddenly we're giving local authorities an administrative role. So which is it? Is it both? How do they work together? And I think I'm uncomfortable passing a law that is so vague in this regard. I think this will end up, when it passes into law, causing more confusion for local authorities, more confusion for existing community arts councils as to how they're meant to operate in this new regime. And bear in mind, Mr Chair, this bill repeals the previous Act. So this is it. There's nothing else. Clauses 14 through 18 are it for community arts councils. And I simply do not believe that there is sufficient guidance in here for community arts councils and local authorities as to how they should behave in this part of the law. So, Mr Chair, there's some questions there for the government that I believe they should answer. If they can't answer them, I think they should support Tracy Martin's SOP, because at the very least that gives some certainty that it's local authorities who will be doing this. I would want within that the assurance that there is flexibility for sub-areas within a local authority to be able to form a community arts council, and I think probably that is contained in the other clauses here. But at the moment, Mr Chair, I think this is an extremely vague and confusing section of the bill, and unless the Minister is able to explain what the government is actually up to here, we certainly can't be supporting part 2 of the bill.
Esanati Loloi Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Chair.